we are gonna learn a little bit about the different types of keyframes that you can always use in your animations. Now, for some keyframes I do have put the shortcut right over here, but for some of them I have not done that because it's really easy for you to just go and find them. So let's go ahead and learn a little bit about some keyframes. So the first type of keyframe that we have right over here is the linear keyframe. Also in this section we will know what the graph for the speed of these keyframes looks like. So let's go ahead. The first keyframe is the linear keyframe and it looks something like this. And this is a linear keyframe. The linear keyframe is the basic type of keyframe that you will find in most of animation softwares. Now the good side about the linear keyframe is that the speed of this keyframe, the speed of the motion between the two places, the two keyframes, remains the same throughout. Now let's say I select all these keyframes and let's view the graph that it has. It has this type of graph where the speed remains the same throughout this animation. These keyframes are very easy to create. Let's just go ahead and create it for you. You can just, I'm gonna make a circle right over here and bring the anchor point of the circle towards the middle of this composition right over here. And to create these keyframes, you just click on the stopwatch, create some motion right over here, and we have these linear keyframes. The motion remains the same throughout these keyframes. Now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about our toggle and hold keyframes. Now these keyframes, what they actually go ahead and do is they change the position of this object, but they don't have any motion right here. Now this kind of animation is not really used in animation anymore. It can be used in some special cases of animation, but I haven't ever really used this kind of animation anywhere. But if you do want to use this kind of animation, you can. Let's say there is an image popping up right over here and you want to change the scale of this image from this from size 0 to size 100. You can change the scale by using this kind of animation that we have right here. So let's go ahead and look at how we can create these kinds of keyframes. We have our our object right here. Just gonna move this anchor point in the middle of this shape right here, and I'm gonna press P on my keyboard and bring up my position panel right over here. I can click on the stopwatch right here, move a few frames further, and then what I can go ahead and do is I can press Ctrl Alt and click on this keyframe, and this will be turned into a toggle hold kind of keyframe. Now if I move my object, let's say right over here, it's a toggle hold kind of keyframe. I can move it anywhere I want. Let's say I want to move it right over here. Oops. Let's say I want to move it right here, and then a few frames later I want to move it right over here. It will not have any kind of motion. It will just move its location. So that is it for toggle hold type of keyframes. Let's view the graph that these keyframes have here. Now as you can see, this graph over here does not indicate any motion to these keyframes. It's a very basic type of graph where we have 4 keyframes. Now this is because each of these keyframes shows change, but because these are because this is a toggle hold kind of keyframe, what it's doing is it's just changing the data but does not have any motion in between. If it had any motion like we saw in the linear keyframe, it will have a square right over here or a rectangle right over here, or if it was an easy ease keyframe, it will have a bell curve right over here. Well, that is it for our Control Alt click or our toggle hold animation keyframes. Let's go to easy ease keyframes. Now the shortcut to easy ease keyframes is F9, and this is the type of keyframe that I use the most. Honestly, this and rove cross time and linear continuous keyframes will be your friend in any kind of animation that you go ahead and do. This type of keyframe is amazing, and we have used it in projects before. So you can see this type of keyframe, it starts out slow and slow, but it reaches its peak around the middle and then goes out slow. That is why it's called easy ease keyframe. Let's look at the graph right over here. Let me zoom in just a tad. and you can see the graph is like this. It's like a bell curve. It comes in a little bit slow, but then it reaches its peak performance or its peak speed and then goes out slow as well. As you can see, this is how it looks like. Now let's know how we can create this kind of keyframe. Press Q on your keyboard, have a circle shape right over here. Oops, I'm going to create a circle shape and I'm going to bring up the position panel. I'm going to add the first keyframe, then move a few frames and add a second keyframe. Now, as we saw in the previous lesson, these are linear keyframes. To convert them into easy ease keyframes, there are two steps. You can either press F9 on your keyboard and this will create them into easy ease keyframes, or you can right click on keyframe assistant and then click on easy ease, and this is how they look like now. Let's look at the graph, and that is how the graph looks like. Now most people do tend to mess with these settings, this setting right over here. Even me, I try to keep the intro and the outro for this animation a little bit slower and then reach its peak time, but it's upon your preference. So let's view this animation, and as you can see, this moves very slowly till here, then races towards the end in these three keyframes right here, and then goes out slow as well. Let's view it once again, and that's it for our easy ease keyframes. Now let's move on to our easy ease in keyframes. Now the difference between easy ease in and easy ease keyframes is that with easy ease keyframes we already have the ease in keyframe in place and the ease out keyframe in place. Now I'll show you what that looks like. As you saw, the easy ease keyframes have two of these, while our easy ease out keyframes have one of this, and the easy ease in keyframes has only one of these. Now it might be a little difficult to understand, but once you look at the graph that I'll show you in just a second, you'll know how this actually works. So let's just view the graph right over here, and as you can see, it has this curve towards the end that eases in the animation. It just gives it the peak speed and then it eases in like this. And it also has this stagnant part where the animation starts to take off, then it eases in right over here. Let's see how this animation looks like. See, it reaches its peak speed, starts with peak speed and then slows down a lot. Now let's learn how we can create this kind of keyframe. You can just create a shape right over here, and then what you can go ahead and do is press P on your keyboard, add a keyframe, move a few frames further and move your object like this one. Now to make a easy ease keyframe, easy ease in keyframe, I'm sorry, what you can do is right click on these keyframes, click on keyframe assistant and click on easy ease in, and this is how you can make them. Or you can press shift and F9, and for some reason it's not working, but the shortcut is easy ease keyframe. You press shift plus F9 just like right over here, and that is how you get the easy ease in keyframes. Now let's move to easy ease out keyframes. Easy ease out keyframes are just like easy ease keyframes, but we have the polarity reversed. Now what does that mean? Let's open the graph editor, and we can see that it starts out slow and then reaches its peak performance and then drops down. Let's see how it looks, and this is how it looks. Now it's a very similar type of keyframe then to the easy ease in keyframe, but let's see how we can create this kind of keyframe. Again, I'm going to create a shape right over here. Let it be a rectangle. I don't really it doesn't really matter. And bring up the position panel, click on position, move a few frames further and create our animation right over here. And what we can go ahead and do is select these keyframes, right click right here, go to keyframe assistant and click on easy ease out, and this will create our easy ease out keyframes right over here. Or while they're selected, you can just go ahead and click Control Shift and F9, and this will also convert them into easy ease out keyframes. If you're on a Mac, it's Command Shift and F9, and that is how you can create these kinds of easy ease out keyframes. Now, the next two types of keyframes are very important for you. Now, they are very important because of two reasons. Let's say we have this complex path right over here. Let's create another complex path, and I'll show you why this one is a little important for all of you out there who are trying to get into animation. Now, when this shape has been created, I'll just go ahead and put the anchor point in the middle so that we can see the path very clearly. I can press P on my keyboard, and then I can go ahead and click right over here. Let's move our shape right here. Oops, it's not moving for some reason. Let's select our shape again, and that is my fault. I need to choose the selection tool. I move my shape right over here, and then a few keyframes later I move my shape right over here. This is the path that we have created. Let's create it even curvier like this one. Now, the one thing that is wrong with this is when I open our graph editor right here. First of all, I'll create them as easy ease in keyframes, easy ease keyframes. You can see that it's really hard to work with these kind of animation because we have this middle point right over here. You can't really work with it because no matter how much you work with it, it will always give you some kind of error. Like if you can move it right over here, and it will always give you some kind of error, which will really bug you with your animation. As you can see, it's just stopped in the middle right over there for a few frames, and you don't want that. You don't really want that. So what you can go ahead and do is convert these keyframes into rove across time keyframes. Now you might be wondering what rove across time keyframes does is, well, I'll show you. I can right click over here and click on rove across time, and what this does is it creates a new keyframe just like that. The first and the last keyframe will be your easy ease keyframes, or the keyframe that you chose in the beginning, but the middle keyframe will be a normal one. Let's see how the graph looks like. Now we have this curve right over here, but this point right over here is another keyframe, and you can just manipulate it anytime you want. Let's say I want to make it something like this. I can just go ahead and create that, and this won't really bug you because now you don't really have to worry about doing that. Now we are coming to the final keyframe. Let's come across and learn about the linear continuous type of keyframe. It is similar to the rove across time keyframe, but what it does is we have the same problem. We have created this curve, but what we can't do with it is, again, let's just explain it to you in a better way. First of all, I'm going to create a new shape, and let's create a new shape right over here, and I'm going to move my anchor point in the middle of this shape right over here. Choose the selection tool, and let's bring out the position panel. The first keyframe lies over here, the next one is right over here, and the third one is right over here. Now make this a little more curvy right here, and we have our animation right here. Now we see that again this is a fine animation. We need to easy ease these keyframes by pressing F9 on our keyboard. Now what you see again is we have this divot of a point right over here. Now we could work with this, and we could have these two keyframes as separate keyframes and then move everything around, or what we can go ahead and do is we can just convert this keyframe into a linear continuous keyframe. Now what this will do is it will join these two keyframes right over here. Let's see this. It will join these two like the previous one, but it will join these two and create a divot right here. Now to do that, I can just control and click on my keyframe twice, and this will create a linear continuous keyframe, and this is how it looks like. Let's see how this looks in our animation window, and as you can see, it has joined those two types of keyframes right here, and now no matter how much I pull or push, it will still be that type of keyframe right over here. And this is how the animation won't actually go ahead and be ruined. So that's it for this one, guys. I taught you a little bit about the different kinds of keyframes that you can form in Adobe After Effects. Now I will let you know that the rove across time keyframe and the linear continuous and the easy ease keyframes will be your best friend in any type of animation that you have. You will use other types of keyframes as well as you get more acquainted with After Effects and how you can create animations in After Effects. But these 3 types of keyframes I have used the most, and they help you out a lot. The especially Easy Ease keyframe, I use it a lot. You will see it in this course, and you may have seen it in the previous videos of this course, in the 2 practice projects that we just did. Easy Ease keyframes will really help you out a lot. And in the future videos where we will learning a little bit about motion graphics, and we'll learn a little bit about how you can create vector graphics, you will know that Easy Ease keyframes really help you out. So that's it for this one, guys. I hope to see you in the next video, and until then, bye bye.